In June, the United Nations released updated world population estimates. Among the highlights, the world will grow from its current count of 7.2 billion people to 9.6 billion by 2050. India will surpass China as the most populous country around 2028, and Nigeria could contain more people than the U.S. by 2050. This obviously places agriculture in an important position. The UN already stated food production needed to double by the year 2050 to meet growing demand. Jim Stack specializes in diagnostics and disease management at Kansas State University. At a recent field day at the ARDC near Meade, we discuss why plant biosecurity and climate change are important factors in increasing food supply. But first, we asked why farmers in the U.S. and in Nebraska should notice the importance of meeting rising global food needs.
I would say the very obvious answer to that is that the United States is a very significant player in providing food to feed people in other countries. Nebraska is typical of a state in the Great Plains where we have the good fortune of being able to produce more than we need to satisfy our own population. The benefit that provides then is we can provide the food needs to other countries at the same time providing income to our population. So it's a very nice fit.
The insecurities that a place like Egypt or anything that might have reverberations also affected in the U.S., yes?
Absolutely. Whether we like it or not, the United States is an important country around the world in providing for the needs of populations quite distant from the United States, but also in providing a level of security where the politics might be unstable at any given point in time. The United States is a very important player in the world.
Let's talk about the challenges of getting there, of getting enough food and making it available. And the angle that we haven't talked a lot about is plant biosecurity and the infrastructure to make sure that, as you mentioned today, the solution is the problem. More trade, but there's also a danger in more trade. And that danger is what? I mean, what is the issue with biosecurity?
Well, yeah, as you move plants and plant products around, whether it be the yield, the grain, or the plant parts themselves, you can't help but also move plant pathogens and insect pests, weeds in the seed. That just can't be helped. So you have to balance the benefit derived from shipping plants and plant products around the world with the risk inherent in shipping plants and plant products around the world. And one of those is the redistribution of pests and pathogens. So our challenge is to make sure that we have in place the infrastructure that allows us to intercept these organisms as we move them, but for those that slip through the systems we've put in place, to have the infrastructure that allows us to detect them quickly, figure out what we're dealing with, and respond accordingly so that we can keep their impact small.
Do we have that now?
We do to some extent. It can always be better. We've put in place a lot of practices in the last, say, 10, 15 years that are really showing a lot of benefit. Having said that, with the economic situation being what it is over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've decreased our investment in those systems that we need to protect us. That's a big deal because you can't recover very quickly from these incursions.
Specifically as it relates to plants, what's the danger in climate change and how it can affect a growing season, perhaps?
Well, we've already seen there's some significant research studies that we're looking at that show plant systems around the world are flowering 10 to 12 days earlier than historically they flowered. Significance of that is that they have co-evolved with the agencies that move pollen around, so insect vectors for a lot of pollen. Well, they've co-evolved to be in sync with those other parts of the system. And if all of a sudden they're flowering 10 to 12 days earlier, that puts the system out of sync. Not a good thing in terms of seed production or plant health. The other thing we've seen, and some very good studies on this, is because of the changes in the seasons, we've seen the geographic range of certain plant species start to change. So plants are growing further north than they did before. So the pathogens and the pests that they've co-evolved with That's skewing now, and they're encountering new populations of the organisms that they've been accustomed to, and there will be consequences of that. They will need to find a new equilibrium. So that's going to play out over the next few decades.
We know that the population is going to increase to 10, then to 11 billion by the end of this century. That's not really in question. I mean, you could, I guess, argue fertility based on which end it's going to be on, but the population is going to be there. So what's the answer to how do you solve it? What's the answer to these challenges?
Well, so first of all, the population models have been fairly accurate, so they're fairly dependable. And it would take something extraordinary that we can't even imagine right now to change the trajectory. So we will reach 9 billion by 2043. We'll reach 10 billion probably by 2080 or the end of the century, somewhere in that time frame. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I have full confidence that we can do the science, we can develop the technologies necessary to feed 9 billion people. It will be a challenge. There are some significant hurdles. The water issue is enormous. Where is that water going to come from? Currently, globally, 75% of the fresh water goes to agriculture. Well, if we're going to increase production by 70%, that's going to take a lot more water. Water is also the basis of public health. Sanitation, the basis of public health, water, the basis of sanitation. So as we try to improve public health systems around the world, it's going to take more water. There will be competition for the very resources necessary to grow enough food. So we'll figure that out. It will take the minds of some really good people. It will take an adequate investment of public and private resource to accomplish that. We better wake up soon, though, or the consequences will be greater than they need to be.
Public policy plays what role?
Public policy plays an enormous role. As I indicated earlier, what policy does is it provides the framework for decision making. So it almost steers decision making in a certain way. So if the policy is ineffective and incorrect, it's steering you in the wrong direction. So what we need to do is have informed policy that ensures we continue to progress in the right direction of solving these problems. That's going to take more dialogue between scientists and policymakers, the general public and politicians. We're all going to be affected by these changes in the planet, whether we like it or not. These changes are going to occur. If we want the impacts of those changes to be as small as possible, we need to start addressing it now. When you look at an epidemic of a disease in humans, you need to catch it early. The later it takes, the longer it takes to catch it, the more people are affected. And it's the same with any of these. You need to start managing things when they're small. If you manage problems when they're small, their ultimate impact is a lot less.